You're listening to 3-Minute Marketing, where we interview the world's top growth marketing leaders and distill their knowledge into actionable, bite-sized insights. Now here's your host, Kristi Melani.
Hello again, and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of 3-Minute Marketing. Let's get right into it. My guest today is Kristi Melani. She's currently CMO at Telesign, which is an industry-leading communication platform as a service, a CPaaS. I'm not sure if I said that exactly right, but they're relied on by the world's most trusted brands, including many household names. Prior to that, Kristi headed up growth marketing for tech brands like Anaplan, Poly, and Plantronics. So welcome to the show, Kristi. We're excited to have you.
Excited to be here. Thank you so much.
So let's jump right in. I've heard you say before that metrics, or not metrics, that benchmarks are dead.
Yes.
Why is that? And what should marketers use instead of benchmarks?
So when I think about the benchmark is dead, I think about it in the very traditional sense of when people ask, marketers in particular, when you're ready to present to the board, you're ready to present to the rest of the executive team, you're always asked to give year-over-year benchmarks. And we look at them individually. Here's the 5 things we're measured on, and tell me what it was last year at this time and what it is at this year at this time. I think the pandemic shook benchmarks up dramatically because everything in the world changed. We had to do things differently. We couldn't rely on in-person. We couldn't rely on everybody feeling safe to spend money, to do business. And so that is one of those where it feels, not to sound like a toddler, but a little unfair to be using a year over year when you look at it that way. It's also in the sense of we have to look at it differently to where an SQL, for an example, is what marketing is often measured on. Mm-hmm. Not all SQLs are treated the same. So if I brought in 100 last year and I brought in a 50 this year, right. Well, the average deal size of the SQLs I brought in may have been 3 times. So we end up contributing more to closed win business.
Right.
So what I am recommending to my marketing peers is come up with what and how you want to be measured and come up with what that equation is. So it's not just one thing. I want to be measured on MQLs, SQLs, average deal size, closed win opportunities, and then net retention potentially. So that if you look at all of those together, it tells a much more holistic story. And then you get to of course, dig into each of them. People want to know why. Why was it less than it was last year? But it's all about how you define it and bring the context. Benchmark to me is sort of a buzzword that we've been using for years. It doesn't mean that it's right. So looking at it differently and starting to almost blend them together gives us a better sense than on what's marketing's contribution. And not to mention and not to forget that some of the things, I know people don't like to hear this, but some things that marketing does is hard to measure. And so being forced to find a benchmark is tough. We look at influence, we look at everything, but don't give up on using more of a blended approach rather than just being measured one thing year over year, because the story is bigger than that for all of us.
Boom. There you have it. Very nicely done, Kristi. That was excellent.
With a couple seconds to spare.
Yeah. And it is a really good point. And to me, myself, like I'm an executive, so I look at the business sort of holistically. Like there's not one number that I look at, except maybe like revenue or profit, that it's like a benchmark like that in my mind. But I think a lot of marketers resonate with this because I know, and many of our clients are measured just on 1 or 2 metrics, just on, but that's an incredibly good point. And I think that a lot of marketers today are just looking at the number, the number of ticks in the box, so to speak, and not necessarily the quality.
Yeah.
So I've got some follow-up questions for you, but I like the
Sure.
concept of almost making it an equation
Yeah.
instead of just a single metric or a few metrics.
Yeah.
Let's end here, but we'll continue talking, you and I. If you want to hear the rest of Kristi and I's talk, you can either stick around if you're on the website, or you'll find a link in the show notes in the description to the additional footage. But let's sign off to keep the main episode short here, Kristi.
Perfect.
Let everybody know where they can learn more about yourself as well as Telesign. Sounds like you guys
Yes.
are doing some cool stuff.
Yeah, very cool stuff. It's a very exciting time for us. Telesign.com really shows where the journey we are from our messaging and positioning. And then you can always find me on LinkedIn at Kristi Melani. I'm pretty active on all of my mobile devices, so I tend to respond to as many as I can. But
Nice.
please feel free to reach out.
Kristi Melani, ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you very much, Kristi. We'll see you on the other side.
All right, my pleasure.
To round out the benchmark topic before we move on to some other stuff, I did have a couple questions for you. So is it literally like a formula in your mind, meaning like you'll report on your 10 metrics and then, treat each of those numbers in such a way into some algorithm that spits out a single number of how well you're doing? Like, is that?
So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's where I want to get. But I do think that, again, not everything is weighted appropriately. So it's pretty hard to look at it and say, add all these 5 things together. They all kind of look at different things. But what I'm trying to commit to is, we might have as a company 10 metrics that we report out on as a village, I like to call it, right? So that's the go-to-market team: sales, marketing, customer success, product.
Mhm.
Then I know which ones of those marketing has influence, impact, or is directly responsible for. So those are the ones I pull out and make sure that those trickle down to my team, so that everybody within the organization is measuring towards that. But then it's all in the commentary. It's all in going back to, the way our business works. If I send you an SQL, it's not going to close tomorrow. So if you're asking me on how many of those SQLs were closed in March, I can't, because it's a timing perspective. So it's a little hard to get to one blended metric, but making sure that each of them in order of priority is what you're constantly measuring yourselves on. And I really look at it as marketing's responsibility to educate the organization on what we should be.
Yeah.
There's plenty of times I've been told, I have a goal for you. We want 1 million, visits to the website. Like, I can give you 1 million websites tomorrow if I just put, after dark, after the title of it. But those are not our buyers. Those are not prospects. So,
Right.
and it's hard sometimes to try to push back when you might be asked these questions by an executive, by the board. But it is our job to shape how marketing needs to be viewed, or else it's always going to go back to what people know, which is your year over year benchmarks. And then it's either that, well, you succeeded or you failed.
Yeah.
There's gray in there, unfortunately.
Totally great.
And we got to leave some room for that.
Yeah. So I know, well, I just checked you out on LinkedIn, and it looks like you've been at Telesign for almost a year now. So you're like getting settled in. Have you been able to do that successfully? Like, have you been able to inject or adjust the narrative in such a way that like your model is now being used essentially?
Yeah. And I'm so fortunate, when I think about in my 27 years of doing marketing, I have to say this is the first time I've really, really enjoyed every day of my job. And my husband works for Disney, and I get so jealous because every day he enjoys his job.
Yeah.
I enjoy the job because my peers are so welcoming to understanding what marketing can do, but it also actually helps the rest of them understand how they should be measured. And it was one of the very first projects that I worked on with my peers, with the operations teams, to kind of flip the script a little bit and make sure we all knew what was going to need to be the contribution from each of us to ladder up to the ultimate company goal. Sure, at the end of the day, who who cares, where it comes from, but we do, in the sense that marketing spends money. So I need to be able to show you that my return on marketing investment is, a good one.
Right.
Sales gets incented to sell, but having that really big, clear picture on SQLs, stage one opportunities, pipeline, all of that, it's freeing for people. And so when we first looked at it that way, it was new for many, but I don't know any other way to look at it. And it was so awesome to quickly get to the point where head of sales, customer success, our CEO, finance loves it, right?
Yeah.
To say, this is great. And now that's the slide we start with in every conversation we have. And the board can now say, I get it. I understand who needs to be responsible for what.
You just said something really brilliant. You said that's the conversation that we start or that's the piece that we start every
Yes.
conversation with.
Every one of them.
You just, like, every single time you come and remind them, just banging them on the head over and over again. Here's how we view the world. Here's how we view the world. Oh, by the way, today's agenda is. I like that.
Exactly. And then you start to get to, every level in the organization should have that level of transparency too. Why not? You understand, because then, everybody, I love when my team knows that my work is impacting something.
Yeah.
And it's not just checking a box. It is, we're meeting a pretty big goal for us.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you guys sound like you're killing it over there.
It's an exciting time for sure. It's an exciting time for growth.
So you're giving me ideas as you talk. There's like synapses firing off in my brain. Can I show you something that you might find irrelevant, but you might like?
Of course.
So let me share my screen here. So in terms of getting it into, or like a list of metrics versus like an algorithm that spits out a number or a score, we do that when we design conversion tests. Like if we want to test one homepage or one landing page versus the other, because there's always a million ideas, right? So each idea goes on to a row in this document, but then these are our these are the criteria. How difficult is it technically? How difficult is it from a creative perspective? Known data gaps is like, how confident are we, basically, the confidence score. Hours needed is just level of effort. And then potential win asks essentially, if this works, how big of a deal will it be? Between 1 and 50. So then we just score each of these items. And this is just a simple algorithm that says, or just a simple formula that says, the potential win minus the sum of like all of the costs, basically.
Yep, love it.
So I don't know that you would want to view your entire world like this, but you could view potentially like an individual's contribution or a department's contribution in this way. Or you could view like a program, like an individual program. Like if you're doing LinkedIn, for instance, you could maybe view it in this way.
Well, and I also think that this is an interesting model when you are talking about priorities, right? Because everything is a priority. And I used to, one of my team members years back, he said, the word priority wasn't pluralized until much later in our world, because you're supposed to have one priority. And so if you look at it with a priority score, then as a management team, as the leadership can look and say, is the resource constraints, the timing, the investment, is it going to pay off? Because a lot of times you can have some quick wins. They still take time though, and they're pretty low on the priority list. And all of a sudden you realize, even though it only took you an hour, you could have been spending that hour on the top priority. So I like that from a corporate priority view as well, of there's always big ideas. Some of them should sit within incubation, and some of them should make it on the actual roadmap. So I like looking at it that way, because that also shows a cross-functional view.
Yeah.
Because it's always that, well, it's easy marketing, you can do that. Well, yes, but we're the end of the tail. Look at all the other things that have to happen. And then I think that is an interesting way to measure a lot of different programs, initiatives as well, especially when they are cross-functional, I think.
Yeah, totally. And do you want to know a cool metric I think that nobody really looks at?
What is it?
Brand search volume. Just like how many people are typing,
Yes.
searching you by name, Telesign.
Yeah. Branded
like,
terms are definitely interesting to me.
Like all the little things that you do that you were saying that marketing like doesn't get credit for, it doesn't really show up there. I think one of the best reflections of it is in brand search volume.
Yeah. And that is I remember this was years ago. It was, organic versus paid, right? And the question came to me that said, well, I don't know if people would just come anyway. So I don't know that paid is doing, much. And I said, okay, let's turn it off. We turned it off for 2 weeks, and we saw the branded term organically going down, right? We saw traffic, obviously. I mean, all the things we know as marketers do work. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of a shock value to say it does work. And it is sort of the, what is that? All tides lift. I never get it right.
I know
Rising tides lift all ships, something like that.
That's a tough one.
But I do think that is where sometimes you have to play with that for people to understand why a branded search term that somebody actually types in, that direct traffic that we see in our HubSpot metrics, you don't think they just came there because they're like, you know what, I'm going to look at some word and I think it's Telesign. Right? They had to have heard it from somewhere, something. And many times it is a marketing influence, which is also why I love, multi-touch attribution. It's could be a controversial topic, but you have to show all of the influence points along the way, because sometimes it's 8 or 9 before we're even remotely ready to talk to a prospect. But yes, brand. You
guys are a HubSpot shop, huh? I love HubSpot.
Yes, we are. It was actually the first time. Most of my previous has been, strictly Google Analytics for metrics or Marketo for email. So, walked into HubSpot and thankfully have a wonderful head of marketing operations that is starting to really dig in to realize actually the power of it. Because my first reaction was, uh-oh. But now it's, ooh, wait.
Yeah.
That's a cool dashboard I just looked at actually right before you and I got on the phone.
Nice. I would love to see your dashboard. What are your current initiatives or priorities? I know we've only got a few minutes left here.
It really is brand, because the brand story is what we need to tell about Telesign. And we are in the business of building trust and delivering trustworthy and safe engagements in the digital space. And, plenty of times in my career, I used to tell my teams, don't worry about it too much. We just make widgets. You'll never hear me say that at Telesign, because I know that what we're doing is making the world a safer place for everybody that's going to be on the internet. And there's so many people coming on daily, but you got to know who we are. And so that's about telling the story, the value proposition, and then helping people understand what a world would look like with Telesign in the background, with that continuous trust that we can deliver. And, it's hard because brand is always yeah, but can you get an immediate sale on it? And I typically equate it to, well, you wouldn't marry me unless we've gone out on a few dates first, right? You have to get to know me. You have to, and that is where brand is the courtship part of the dating. Learn who I am, what I do, and then maybe 8, 9 dates later, I might be ready to at least get engaged.
That's a good analogy.
That's a big focus for us, is making sure that the world knows the amazing benefits that Telesign can bring to many of the marketplaces, online apps, fintech, healthcare, you name it.
So give us an example use case, like help me understand a little bit better what it is you guys are doing.
So think about it, a very simple one is sort of the authentication, right? So when you are signing up for something, and then you get the check your phone for a code, that message that was sent through Telesign, right?
Okay.
Then you can also think about it where when companies are onboarding, right? Then you might have I don't want to use any of the specific brand names that we're not approved to use, but you're booking a trip and now you have to sign up for an account. So that whole onboarding process, and there's a lot of them are filled with friction. If I look at those, how many sidewalks are in this picture, and I'm like, oh, sidewalk. Clearly, I didn't pick all the right sidewalks. So now it's like, show me all the street lights. We are trying to avoid that, to where there's all of this logic in the background that can tell that it is me, because it's a recognizable, whether it's my IP address, this is where I normally am, these are behaviors that I normally will do, that we can kind of score that engagement, that onboarding, and can report that back to our customer, who is the app or the use case, and then say, Kristi is who she is. Kristi is who she says she is, and do it in a frictionless way, to where it's, in milliseconds, that then brings me into the fold. And now I'm trusting that the vendor can trust that I am, who I am as well. So there's lots of examples like that. And we work with an omni-channel as well, Viber, WhatsApp, to where we're kind of in those conversational pieces as well.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, exciting.
So no more CAPTCHAs and no more which of these following addresses have you been associated with?
Right, which is always I've never lived in Utah.
Yeah.
Where it's I don't, maybe that's a trick question, but yep, nope, that's not me. So lots more to come for sure, but definitely very globally focused to bring, that safety to the world too.
Nice. Well, hey, thank you so much. Let's wrap here, guys. Go check out Kristi Melani and what she's doing at telesign.com. Sounds really cool. Thanks so much for your time here today, Kristi.
All right. Thank you so much.